All right, let's grab our Bibles this morning, turn to Proverbs chapter number 15, and we are going to have some T-bone steak this morning. All right. Proverbs chapter 15, verse number 18. I don't know how many times I've read through this chapter, and there are just so many rich things in this passage that we're going to take a look at. But what I want you to do is, as we read through this passage, I want you to look at it asking yourself, what am I getting out of this? And then compare that to after the message this morning as to what we got out of it. The encouragement is we need to slow down and we need to be asking the Holy Spirit, what is in here for me? Proverbs chapter 15, verse 18. A wrathful man stirreth up strife, but he that is slow to anger appeaseth strife. The way of the slothful man is as an hedge of thorns, but the way of the righteous is made plain. A wise son maketh a glad father, but a foolish man despiseth his mother. Folly is joy to him that is destitute of wisdom, but a man of understanding walketh uprightly. Without counsel, purposes are disappointed, but in the multitude of counselors they are established. A man hath joy by the answer of his mouth, and a word spoken in due season, how good is it? The way of life is above to the wise, that he may depart from hell beneath. I want to bring a message this morning on the subject, Solomon's Flea Market. Back in 1991, a man was browsing through all sorts of collectible junk at a flea market in Pennsylvania when he came upon an ugly picture in a beautiful frame. And so he decided to buy this ugly thing at a price of $4. He bought it, took it home, looked at it one time, and he said, yep, it's just as ugly here as it was at the flea market. So he took the painting out of it, threw it away. But as he did so, he noticed that the frame, though it was nice looking originally, was really poor quality. The thing was ready to fall apart, wasn't worth saving, so he threw it away as well. But as he was removing the picture, there was a folded piece of paper underneath the painting about the size of a business envelope. And he looked at it, and it was a copy of the Declaration of Independence. Well, you can buy those things for a couple of dollars on the internet, different places, but instead of throwing it away, this individual decided to hold on to it. He showed it to a friend, and the friend is looking at it like, wow. The guy got really excited and encouraged the guy to have it checked out to maybe see how old it was. That's when he discovered that there was no original single copy of the Declaration of Independence. What they did was they created several copies of that document, and only 24 of those copies survived from 1776, and this was one of them. And the first question was, what's it worth? The best guess was given somewhere between $800,000 and maybe $1 million. But the best guess was wrong. It sold for $2.4 million. Well worth the $4 that he spent. Now that sounds incredible, and it is. That is what the book of Proverbs is like. It is so often discounted as not worth much, and yet inside this book are some priceless truths that can turn a person's life around, things that will save us so many heartaches, things that can be a make it or break it for some people. And Solomon is giving us these things for free, and you don't even have to spend $4 for it. So let's go through this passage and take a slower look at what Solomon is saying. In verse number 18, here's the first truth this morning. Choose your enemies carefully, because you'll have them for a lifetime. Be slow to make enemies. Verse 18, a wrathful man stirreth up strife, but he that is slow to anger appeaseth strife. When it comes to war, we've been spoiled. We in this country have been spoiled by the length of wars that we've been engaged in. Our Revolutionary War lasted for 8 years. The Civil War lasted for 4 years. World War I was well underway when we got into it. We were only involved in it the last 2 years. World War II lasted for 4 years. The Korean War lasted for 3 years. The Vietnam War lasted for 11. The Persian Gulf War lasted for less than 2 years. And the longest war of this nation is the war in Afghanistan that's been going on, started in 2001, been going on for the last 16 years. So how does that stack up in relation to some of the longer wars in the world? The longest war of all was called the Reconquista, or the Reconquering. It was a battle between the Catholics and the Muslims in the region of Spain and Portugal, and it lasted for an amazing 774 years. The Roman-Persian War lasted for 681 years. The Mexican-Indian Wars lasted for 414 years. The Polish-Russian War lasted for 381 years, and they just wrapped it up in time for both of them to become involved in World War II. The Hatfields and the McCoys wasn't even a war, it was only a family feud, but it lasted for 11 years. The point is that wars can go on for a whole lot longer than people could even imagine. And that goes for nations and families and individuals. So guess how long an enemy can end up hating somebody, trying to hurt them with gossip and spite? The usual answer is, for as long as they live. It is for that reason Solomon is trying to help us with some relationship issues, and that being, you'd be a whole lot better off if you learned how to put out the fires instead of starting them. You make an enemy, write it down, remind yourself that enemy could be somebody trying to hurt you for as long as you or they happen to live. For that reason, it's a good idea to allow your anger to grow very, very slowly. If there is a fight in your life that needs to be fought, you can always start it tomorrow. You don't have to rush out and try to get the thing going before noon. If it's a fight that needs to be fought, it can be delayed until it's absolutely necessary. But you need to be very, very cautious and do not make needless enemies. Have you ever made a mistake? All of us have. Have you ever said something that you wish you could take back? Every husband has. For both of those reasons, the wise person will realize that there are better things to do in life than going around fighting everybody. So be smart and spend your time putting out fires, because any fool can start one. Verse 19. Confusion can be a good thing. The way of the slothful or lazy man is as an hedge of thorns, but the way of the righteous is made plain or obviously clear. In 1846, much of our country was caught up with manifest destiny, this idea that it was God's will that we own everything between the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific. And because of that, thousands of people were heading west, making their way to California or somewhere between Missouri and the Pacific Ocean. And a lot of these individuals, they were making their westward journey by way of wagon trains. So what was the best way for them to get from the starting point, which was usually Missouri, making it all the way to California? It was called the Oregon Trail. And that journey was one that was tried and true. But there were always people, then and now, who were always looking for a way to make a buck. One such man was Lansford Hastings. He claimed to have discovered a shortcut. And he was willing to guide individuals along this other journey. And by doing so, they could save money and they could also get there faster. And so there was a group of people who were willing to pay less. They could save money. They could get there faster. This was a 4 to 6 month journey, which is why a lot of people were anxious to get there a whole lot faster. And so there was a group of individuals called the Donner Party. And they decided to take up Hastings' claim for this shortcut that would get them there faster. The Donner Party they were a group 100% immigrants. They were recently arrived from other countries. They were wanting to strike it rich, building a new life for themselves. This faster, cheaper way, it was something that appealed to them, and so all 90 immigrants chose to follow Mr. Hastings. They left Missouri, and the idea was they were going to meet Mr. Hastings. They'd never met him in person, but they were going to meet him at a place called Fort Bridger in Wyoming. When they arrived, he wasn't there. But he left a message for them, and the message was, "Wait for me." They waited for 8 days. Each day was becoming more dangerous because they were going to be going through some winter mountainous terrain. Every day that they waited was another day that they were getting closer to the snow. And therefore, after 8 days, they sent one of their individuals out to find Mr. Hastings, and wherever he was, they had to know what's going on. The writer came back, and the message was, "I'll meet you at another place. Go ahead and head out on the shortcut. I'll meet you there on the trail." And so they immediately had a problem because there were some people in the group who didn't like this. Something didn't smell right. Everybody else was going on the Oregon Trail. The Donner Party was the only one that was going on this shortcut. And there was some dissension and strife coming about in this group, but they finally decided to, as a group, take the shortcut. After a number of days, they arrived at the place where they were supposed to meet Mr. Hastings, and there they found a note stuck on a stick. Stick in the ground, note on top. And the note basically told them, "Continue on, and I'll meet you down the trail." And that's when they had a tough decision to make. Do we turn around and go back? We've already lost a couple of days. Or do we press on and meet up with them later on? That's when they decided to press on. And things were going from bad to worse. None of these individuals had ever seen an Indian. These people did not have any survival skills. They were supposed to be under the care of this guide, Mr. Hastings. They were trudging off into the wilderness, which was becoming more and more barren and less populated. They were in Indian territory. They would not have known what to do if they were ever attacked. And time was slipping away. And they all knew if they did not arrive at that one particular choke point, a certain mountain pass, before the snow fell. They'd have to wait all winter long until they could trudge on to California. Unfortunately, they arrived at the mountain pass late. They could not continue their journey. They had to camp out right where they were. And it was as bleak and barren as you could imagine. Some froze to death. Some starved to death. And the only ones that survived because they resorted to cannibalism. Out of 90 people who started, only 43 survived that winter. Now, it would be a mighty easy thing to blame Hastings, the man who convinced them to take the shortcut. But there is one big reason why that's not the best choice. The Bible says in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 33, "For God is not the author of confusion, but of peace, as in all churches of the saints." There was massive confusion in the Donner Party from day one. They were in too big of a hurry, and they knew that they were inexperienced. And that is exactly where so many Christians find themselves this morning. Because they get themselves in a situation where they're hoping for the best, and the reason for that hope is because that's what they want. They become locked in on their own selfish desires, and all along the way, God is trying to erect a hedge of thorns, telling them, turn around, go back, there's nothing good that lies ahead. And the greater the opposition that they encounter, the greater the confusion. But instead of realizing that their confusion could be a warning that, hey, this is not of God, they press on with their shortcut of their own making. So what should we do if we're confused as to what we're doing, where we're headed, or what we ought to be doing next? Where there is confusion, there needs to immediately be called a timeout. It's time to reassess the situation. It's time to find out, is God trying to tell us something? Could we potentially be going in the wrong direction? What should we do next? This is going to go so contrary to how the world thinks. Financially, you're better off losing and forfeiting a down payment on something than to press on, hope that it works out for the best, and be forced into declaring bankruptcy. Cut it loose. Bad decisions are costly. Cut your losses. If God is not in this thing, believe me, you're going to lose a whole lot more than that down payment. Marriage-wise, it's better off to call the wedding off than to marry somebody who is going to divorce you in 10 to 20 years. Now, a lot of people will not do that. Most people will not do that because of the embarrassment. Oh, we've already gotten these gifts. There's a million reasons why you need to press on, but there's one good reason for calling it off, and that is, if God's not in it, you better run the other direction. Church-wise, it's better to stay put in a good church where you're 100% sure that God led you to that, rather than moving out of a church simply because you think it's okay. If God's not in it, question mark, you better stay put. Where there is confusion, there is also an absence of faith. Listen to this verse, Romans 14, verse 23. Whatsoever is not of faith is sin. What that means is, when you got a question mark on something, you better slow down on the decision. Listen to Solomon and understand and realize Confusion can be a very good thing. Because when you see it, you better call a timeout. You better start digging as if your life depended on it to find out why is there confusion, hesitancy over this matter. Because God is not the author of confusion. Verse number 20. Let's have an intermission. Because before I get into this one, every young person, I'm glad that we got the college students back because this is for you. Number 3, how you treat a parent is how you will treat a spouse. We're getting into a biblical principle here. It escapes most people. So let's just kind of slow down and take a look at what Solomon is trying to tell us here at verse number 20. A wise son maketh a glad father, but a foolish man despiseth his mother. Found in this verse is a biblical principle, and the whole issue is how a person treats mom and dad is huge. It is huge. This verse is identifying a biblical principle that will come back and haunt a person who tries to violate it. If a son is willing to live in such a way that he's trying to make his father glad and proud of him, then when he gets married, he will do the same for his wife. He will try to please her. This young man will try to make her proud of him. As he treats his parents, he will one day treat his wife. The same applies to how he treats his mother. If he is disrespectful to mom, if he's rebelling against her, then woe be to the woman that he chooses to marry and who is foolish enough to marry him. And the reason is because as a young man treats his mother, one day he's going to treat his wife the same way. And that is what makes this simple verse such a valuable piece of advice for people. If a single person wants to get a glimpse of what marriage is all about and what it's going to be like with that one particular person, what they need to do is check out how that person is treating their own parents. And I have seen it over and over and over and over again. You show me a rebel who's treating their parents in a not-so-nice fashion, marriage is not going to change that person's character. If they're a rebel in the home where they're growing up, they will eventually become a rebel in the house where their wife happens to be. This thing, it's bigger than people imagine. Sometimes a young woman will fall in love with a young man who's clearly a rebel. He's rebellious in school. He's rebellious in his home. And her heart has some rebellion in there as well, and so she thinks that rebellion is cool. They get married, only to discover that that rebellion is something that doesn't have boundaries. It spills over everywhere. And before long, that marriage is in trouble. If they're a rebel with their parents, they will be a rebel to their spouse. Verse 21. When sin becomes fun, you're close to rock bottom. Folly is joy to him that is destitute or void of wisdom. But a man of understanding walketh uprightly. According to Solomon, the person who doesn't have a lick of sense will find great joy in doing that which is illegal or sinful. One of the most thrilling times in the lives of some is when they have decided to have an affair and they're cheating on their spouse. As they get into this illicit relationship, they cannot wait until it's rendezvous time. They cannot wait until they're enjoying the forbidden fruit. They cannot wait until their next text. And the reason is because having an affair can be exhilarating and fun. And when an affair is that enjoyable, the handwriting's on the wall because the roof is just about ready to cave in. That's what Solomon is saying. Folly is joy to that person who is void of wisdom. John Dillinger, Bonnie and Clyde, Al Capone, all of these people and so many more had lives that so many people were envious of. They were rich. They were famous. They lived such daring lives. They lived and died like kings. They were the talk of the town. They were treated many times and viewed as royalty. They enjoyed what they were doing. And they all had something in common. When they were at their peak, that is when they were so close to hitting rock bottom. They were enjoying sin. And they had no concept how close they were to having their whole life come down in shambles. John Dillinger, at his peak, was gunned down by the FBI outside of a movie theater at the ripe old age of 31. Bonnie and Clyde, gunned down by police in Louisiana. Bonnie was 23, Clyde was 25. Al Capone was a millionaire and liked to flaunt his money and his power. He was arrested for tax evasion, sent to prison where he died of a venereal disease at the age of 33. When you hear somebody say that sin isn't fun, mark that person down as a liar. Because the devil has made sure that sin is very enjoyable. Can be for a time. But there's another side to sin that most people never see until it's too late. And that is when sin becomes something that is enjoyable, it will not end well. Verse 22. Our decisions are tainted by selfishness. Verse 22, without counsel or godly advice, purposes, our intentions, are disappointed. But in the multitude of counselors, they are established. Now here's a pretty easy truth to understand, and that is, if you're not willing to ask for advice, then what you really want will never be found. And how are we to avoid the disappointment that we will surely face without godly counsel? What we need to do is we need to humble ourselves. And before a major decision, a life-changing decision is made, we need to seek out people who are godly and honest enough to tell us the truth, which usually is what we don't want to hear. But if getting godly advice will increase the likelihood of our success, why wouldn't more people be willing to ask for godly counsel? The reason is because godly advice will not line up with what the flesh wants to do. And when the flesh gets hold of somebody and they just have to have it, why get advice that you know is going to go against what you really want. The flesh is selfish, which means that when it gets its hooks into a person, it will do anything and everything to keep that person from getting proper advice, because that proper advice just might jeopardize what the flesh wants. I don't know how many times people have come to me and they've gotten advice on this or that, and as soon as I tell them, they always say, "I knew you'd say that." But unfortunately, so many more refuse to even get counsel at all for the same reason. Because they know what I'll say. It's nothing personal, but if a person's going to ask me, I'm going to tell them what I think. I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings. But as a pastor, I'm obligated to tell them what I think is a good understanding of the Bible. I've mentioned this illustration before, but there was a pastor, a successful pastor in Ohio. One of the best soul winners in the country, wrote a book on soul winning. I still have it in my study. This man's wife got cancer. On her deathbed, she asked to see her husband and her best female friend. On her deathbed, she said, "I really honestly believe that God would have you both to get married after I'm gone." She passed away. The pastor and that good lady in the church ended up getting married. And in a short amount of time, their marriage had such a negative impact on the church congregation that the pastor was forced to resign his church and go elsewhere. What was the problem? I would say that 99% of the people in that church had no problem with the pastor marrying that woman. The problem was 6 months. The pastor's wife passed away, and the pastor is remarrying a woman in the church in only 6 months. And it gave the appearance that they had been seeing one another while the wife was still alive. And the church members balked. The pastor realized that this thing was so serious in the congregation, he decided that he didn't want to deal with it any longer. And so he resigned the church. A closed mind can be a very dangerous thing. And by the way, my gut feeling is that pastor did not reach out to any of his preacher friends and get their advice. Any experienced pastor could have told this individual, I don't think this is going to go over too well. I think that some people in your church may see an appearance of evil. If you'd asked me, I said, it's not a good idea. And from that, I take it that he didn't get any advice. You know why, if he did not? Because he probably didn't want to hear it. We can be selfish. We are selfish. And our decisions, by and large, are tainted by selfishness, which is the reason why we have a whole lot more problems in life than we ought to have. The result of having a closed mind is a reality that you will have to live with a decision that was based on selfishness, and those consequences can play out for a lifetime. Verse 24. God's way is the only way. The way of life is above to the wise, that he may depart from hell beneath. The way of life mentioned here is not the easiest path to take, but it'll by far provide the least regrets. If you pursue a godly lifestyle, I can just about guarantee it's going to be more difficult than following the path of the world. The world creates an easy path. You follow the way of the world, you don't have to get up early in the morning and have your devotions. You get to sleep in later. You follow the world's path, you don't have to tithe and give up 10% of your income. You get to spend more money on yourself. You follow the way of the world, you get to sleep in late every Sunday morning. It's not supposed to be easy to live the Christian life, but the benefit is you're going to have a whole bunch of fewer regrets by choosing to do so. Jim Bridger was a mountain man who couldn't read, couldn't write, but he became famous because of his explorations that he was involved in from Colorado all the way up to Canada. Remember, in a recent sermon, I gave an illustration about another mountain man by the name of Hugh Glass. He's a guy that was scouting for food. He came upon a grizzly bear, 2 cubs, and the grizzly bear attacked him, ran up, threw him down on the ground, and started mauling him. 2 men from that party ran up, shot the grizzly bear, and Hugh Glass was so close to dying. The leader of the exploration party decided to leave 2 of his men behind to kind of babysit him until he died. And after 5 days, they decided this is too dangerous, and they abandoned him, took his weapon, took his survival equipment that he had. Jim Bridger, the famous Jim Bridger, was the 19-year-old young person who was part of the 2 people left behind to watch over him. Jim Bridger took the bonus money. Jim Bridger went along with the lie. Jim Bridger was the one that almost allowed Hugh Glass to die. And Hugh Glass, because of the boy's youth, Hugh Glass decided to forgive him. But that was not the only infamous claim to fame for Jim Bridger. Remember the Donner Party? They were supposed to meet Mr. Hastings at Fort Bridger. The fort was not only named after Jim Bridger, he's the one that owned it. It was a trading post. Jim Bridger was the guy that was selling the supplies to all 90 members of the Donner Party. And it was the same Jim Bridger that told them, oh yeah, that shortcut, I'm familiar with it. It's a piece of cake. Easy on the wagons. Nice, safe journey. It'll not be any problem at all. And the reason that he told them that was because it was financially better for him if they took the shortcut than if they went on the Oregon Trail. As a result of that lie, the Donner Party was doomed to a journey of death or cannibalism. But guess what? Good old Jim Bridger made a lot of money in his lifetime. He got paid a big bonus when he left Hugh Glass to die. He made a lot of money off the Donner Party after he recommended that they take the shortcut. And unfortunately, that seems to be our only choice in life. It's either God's way or it's our way. We're either going to pay the price for finding out what God would have us to do, or we're going to suffer the consequences when we choose to launch out in the direction of our own choosing. And we can have what we want, but we're going to pay for it. Let's bow for prayer. Father, would you please bless all of our people here this morning? And Holy Spirit, I pray that you would help us to marvel at the tremendous advice that Solomon gave to us in this book. Holy Spirit, you're providing warnings for us. When we encounter a wall of thorns, painful obstacles, maybe it's time to turn around because we're going in the wrong direction. When we're experiencing confusion, maybe we need to call a timeout. Holy Spirit, please use this book to open our minds and our hearts so that we can choose the right path instead of the easy path. Our heads are bowed, our eyes are closed.